Good afternoon. Good afternoon. My name is Aaron Jordan. I'm the Assistant Inspector General for Investigations. I'm with the Inspector General's Office under the Department of Education. We're happy to be here. By show of hands, just curious, how many folks saw our presentation last year? Just trying to determine how much we should embellish. Yeah. Okay. Terrific. We're happy to be here to talk about our office, our mission, talk about the relationship with you and the importance of that relationship with you and our role within the department. I'm joined by some very talented folks in my office, Nicole Eisenzopf, Rob Mancuso, and Jason Williams. We're going to spend a few minutes today. I'm hoping we can get through our presentation and educate you a little bit about what we do, but more importantly, take some questions from you. Last year, I left my number out there, and I received a number of calls from you, and some very good conversations, which we'll talk a little bit about why those conversations are important, not only for our office, but also for what we share with the department, right, and ensuring you're able to do your jobs and that we are able to do our jobs, not only in administering financial aid, but protecting those funds. So with that being said, we're going to start with a video here.
New York-based vocational school is busted today, accused of issuing phony student visas.
The federal agents raided several locations this morning, including one in Chelsea. That's where CBS 2's Weijia Zhang is live with more this afternoon. Weijia.
Yeah, Chris, you can see federal investigators right behind me at this Chelsea location. As you mentioned, they are raiding several others as well. In this case involving several agencies, including Homeland Security and the Department of Education, all working to help prosecute what they describe as a sketchy school making fast and dirty money.
Oh, they say the school is closed today.
Students at Micropower Career Institute in Chelsea turned away to make room for federal investigators conducting an extensive raid.
They're looking for evidence of visa fraud and education fraud.
5 of MCI's administrators, including the president, vice president, and CEO, were arrested this morning, charged with student financial aid fraud, visa fraud, and conspiracy.
For more than 20 years, we've been helping students from many countries learn to be more fluent speakers of English.
The company website boasts it helps international students get visas, but the U.S. Attorney says MCI also provided them to people who were not students, illegal aliens who paid to be listed as students. MCI got their cash and extra financial aid funding from the government. The defendants are also accused of issuing fraudulent visas to legitimate students, like Mickey Khan from Malaysia.
I'm going to double check my visa, and then because it's going to affect my studies, my future.
That's the only thing that I'm depending on for my stay here.
MCI is also a trade school for local students who don't know when classes will resume, if at all.
Disappointed because this is messing with our career, basically. Like, we chose to come to school and now all of this is happening. It's not fair.
Teachers are worried too, stunned after hearing about the charges.
They look like thieves or something, you know. I don't believe it.
The defendants are scheduled to be arraigned sometime this afternoon. If convicted, they face up to 20 years in prison. It's unclear what will happen to MCI or its students. Live in Chelsea, Weijia Zhang, CBS 2 News.
I can tell you it's a bad day when you end up on the news here. And what separates most of us from folks who decide to take that direction is just a bad decision, right? I mean, I think there are circumstances we all face that we ultimately come to a crossroads in doing the right thing or the wrong thing. Our job essentially, because our cases are reactive, are to find those who decide to make the bad decisions and use funds for other than what their intended purpose. So what are we talking about today? We're going to talk a little bit about our organization, talk about the relationship between FSA and OIG. I think it's such an important one. It's one that we really value, and I think sometimes the distinctions are blurred a little. I've had a number of you call me about things that were not really investigations, but were program reviews, and sometimes get upset at me, and I very quickly give you Robin Miner's number so that I can point the finger, have you speak with her. We'll talk about the sources of allegations. We get many allegations through our hotline from folks like you. And in the spirit of full disclosure, the case you saw there is really, they're few. Most of what we investigate are really subjects trying to defraud the department and defraud you. Probably 95% of what we look at, you are the victim in some way and we are the victim, and there are external criminals really trying to get at what they see as a cash cow in many schools. We'll talk a little bit about our statutory and regulatory access to records, standards of administrative capability, and fraud indicators. Every year we try to educate you all about the kinds of things we see, because each year criminals get more complex, they get smarter, and they evolve. Crimes evolve. And I'm amazed because I guess the only thing that limits is the imagination, right? They learn systems, you put in controls, and they circumvent them. So that's very, very important. Jason's going to walk you through examples of fraud cases. We're going to talk a little bit about the difference between criminal fraud and civil fraud, right? Sometimes there's some frustration from many of you who are doing very good things in your schools and making great referrals, and then this office doesn't investigate it, right? I mean, we have a lot of fraud that we look at. What I can tell you is not everything can we investigate, but we ensure everything gets the appropriate attention, whether that's by our office or by FSA, but we make sure it gets somewhere so there's some attention brought to it. We have Rob and Nicole who will talk about their group, the Technical Crimes Division. And if you're not aware, I can tell you this will be one of your biggest challenges for your universities and your schools. You know, the more we are on the internet, the more technology that's involved, folks are very, very smart, very, very strategic in how they're using your systems, our systems, and I think we do a pretty good job of, you know, trying to protect our funds and our resources, but it is something you have to pay attention to. It is beyond me. I rely on this guy here, Rob, very much so for that, because he keeps abreast of those issues and how they evolve. In the end, we're going to talk about ways you can help us, ways we can help you, and why that's such an important relationship. And I'm hoping we have time at the end, because we want to have questions, which I thought were probably the best part of the session, last two sessions last year, where we really got to hear from you and hear your concerns and get to address some of the things that I think many of you may want to ask, may not have the opportunity to ask, and hopefully we have that opportunity here. A little bit about our background. We are part of the department, but we are independent. What does that mean? I work for a presidential appointee, Kathleen Tai, and she is our inspector general. She determines what we audit and investigate. Our obligation to the department and to the secretary is that we keep them informed. In many ways, we try to help improve the efficiency and operations of programs. It's a tough job. It is a very, very tough job. In some cases, we come out to schools and universities and conduct reviews. But for us, our primary mission is to detect fraud, waste, and abuse. Report what we can to the department so the department can address those issues. And then the fraud, we try to take on ourselves. Many times, and we'll talk a little bit about it, we work with our law enforcement partners, FBI, state and local law enforcement where we can when there's things like identity theft, which is plentiful, right? As much information is out there about all of us, any of us can be victims. So it's an important role we play, and the reason we have that independence is so sometimes we can shine a light on the department about things they may or may not be doing, or ways that they can improve. And it's, I think it's a respectful relationship. It's sometimes a tough conversation to have, but a much needed conversation. Our authority comes from the Inspector General Act of 1978. Just as background, there are, I think, 73 Inspector General offices and various federal agencies, and our mission extends for the department. Anything the department's funds and operation touches, we have the authority to investigate, right? You know, sometimes we come and we ask for records from schools, or we ask for records from third parties, and you know, we get pushback, not understanding. No, we have, and we're entitled to that information, and we have techniques that we often employ. I will say this: we're going to talk a little bit about techniques. Disclaimer: please don't use any of these techniques on your spouses, children, or significant others. All right, we don't want to be held liable for you investigating. Our office is broken in 3 components: audit services. Simply, they conduct audits of your programs. Investigation services, in which I run, we primarily conduct investigations, all right? And then we have information technology audits and computer crimes investigation. That's Rob and Nicole, and they do a little bit of both. Anything related to IT systems and information systems, they're very smart. I really admire how they pursue their jobs and the things they have to deal with. Really, technology evolves so quickly, so you can understand the challenges there. Our regions, investigation services solely, we're in 16 offices around the country. We're broken out in 4 regions. As you can see, we're stretched, so we travel quite a bit, right? Our agents and our investigators around the country. We're in Puerto Rico, but we can't be everywhere all the time and do everything. So we have to prioritize our work. You know, again, I talked to a number of you, and I'm more than willing to get on the phone and have that conversation as to why we address certain things, why we can't get to certain things, to make sure you're informed. But just there are resource limitations. I think the same sort of resource limitations you have in your schools and universities. But we do a terrific job. I think, you know, if you have an opportunity to check out our website, you can see the work we do for the size office we have. It's very important work, and it just continues. There's so much of it that we receive. And we're constantly on the road. Talking a little bit about our partnership with FSA, you know, it is one that I think it's so important that we honestly could not do our jobs effectively without the partnership with FSA. There is a give and take. It's not always, you know, hand-holding and hugs, but I think it is one that is so important. FSA really does have the experts in the programs. They are the ones responsible for managing and operating the programs. Our role, sometimes we Monday morning quarterback, right? We sit back, we conduct reviews, we conduct investigations, we look for vulnerabilities, and we point those things out to the department. Sometimes we offer, and many times we offer our recommendations for improvement, some of which, you know, they take, some, you know, there's disagreement on. But in that give and take, there's always, I think, an honest effort to improve the operations and programs of the department. You may have heard of what we call our management information report. We did a fraud ring report at the time. So whenever we, through our investigations, identify vulnerabilities, things that we feel you need to be aware of, the department needs to be aware of, we will produce these reports so that hopefully you can take corrective action. It's not often we get that because it's a cumulative effect on our work. Sometimes years, sometimes we see a pattern of things that we didn't recognize before, and then in that instance we will put together what we call a MER. The differences between OIG and FSA, and last year there were a lot of questions about the enforcement office that created some confusion, and so we thought we would cover that difference here today. Again, our role primarily investigate and audit. For investigation services, we're primarily conducting investigations, and our work is reactive, so it is totally dependent in many ways on the information you provide or the information we get from FSA. We work with prosecutors throughout the country, sometimes at the state level, most times at the federal level, working with assistant U.S. attorneys around the country to prosecute our cases. We have full statutory law enforcement authority, ability to conduct search warrants, effect arrests, serve subpoenas, and the like. So we carry firearms. Oftentimes I'm on in the company of other law enforcement agencies, and they say, well, Department of Education, why do you carry a gun? And I'm sorry, I may have given you a bad rap and say, financial aid administrators are tough. I mean, this is serious work. No, seriously. But we get questions, but we work in many instances with other law enforcement agencies. And it's interesting how small nexus are out there where we end up working with the FBI on a terrorism case, or we end up working with ATF or DEA, some of your state and locals, because criminals don't stop at one thing, right? I mean, they really try to expand their repertoire of what they're doing, and sometimes fraud also blends into maybe some other aspect of general crime, and we often share a relationship in trying to make sure we address the full spectrum of what's taking place there. FSA obviously manage the programs. They have administrative investigation violations of the HEA. And so things sometimes go back and forth. I've often gotten questions, hey, we made a referral to your hotline and you guys didn't do it. Well, we may determine, and everything we do, we triage. It's nothing we get and we just shove it forward. We will triage to make sure, is it something that falls in our jurisdiction, and is it criminal or civil? If it's not, we will immediately try to get it to the FSA folks so that they have every opportunity early on in the process to address what they can through their administrative process. They're authorized to take administrative actions under the HEA, and you're clearly aware of the program reviews that they conduct. And the enforcement office, I think, is continuing to involve, obviously, dealing with borrower's defense and the like. But it's a very important relationship, constant communication, exchange of information, so that we're hopefully staying on top of things we need to address as a department. Why are you important and why are we here? It wasn't often that we came to this conference and I asked why. I mean, I know it's FSA conference, but I think we play an important role for FSA as well as department. But we're here to talk about our relationship with you. I mean, you serve a critical role. You are what we call our front line. You are the eyes and ears. You're going to see things long before we see them in the IG's office, but maybe even before FSA captures some of those things. So, you know, it's important that you understand your role. I think today you're here having training and the like. Hopefully those things will help you prepare to do your jobs, improve how you do your jobs. But a lot of referrals we get where we have great cases come from people like yourselves. You see things, you question, you maybe scratch your head and decide, I don't think this is right, so let me contact the OIG. Sometimes you contact FSA and they say, hey, we think this might be criminal, and FSA contacts us. So again, you serve as the OIG's eyes and ears. Very important. Sources of information, just want to give you a sense of how many avenues we get information. Talked about you, we get our hotline. Hotline probably receives over 3,000 complaints a year. I know you now have the FSA feedback system. We're connected to that. I think FSA and OIG has done a good job trying to make sure things that should get to us get there, and things that should be in FSA are appropriately routed. Program offices, other law enforcement agencies, the FBI, for example, we get some referrals. It's the FBI, so they try to work everything, and we have to sometimes elbow ourselves into jurisdiction we should work, but it is an important relationship. U.S. Attorney's Office, where crimes are sometimes, allegations are sent to them. So there are many sources, citizens and students, parents. It's amazing, sometimes parents will have that sixth sense and say, you know, something just doesn't seem right in my son's school, my daughter's school, and make referrals. And so run the gamut. QUETAMS, if you're familiar with that, I think we'll talk a little bit, Jason's going to talk a little bit about that as we move forward. So I'm going to turn it over to Jason, let him talk about our statutory and regulatory access to records.
Good afternoon. As Aaron said, my name is Jason Williams. I'm the Assistant Special Agent in charge in the Southern region. So that map he showed, I'm actually out of Florida. How many people here from Florida? Anybody from Florida? Oh, a lot of people. Well, let me tell you a unique thing about my office. So I supervise the office in Florida and also the office in Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. So Florida, the office in Florida is the only one that has to work one state. And why do you think that is? Anybody know? Florida is the epicenter of fraud of the entire country, if you haven't ever figured it out. I think the sun makes people crazy. But anyway, so our office is in Florida. Anyway, I'm going to talk to you about now. We're going to move on. We're going to talk about FERPA. So during our investigations, a lot of times you'll see from us, and it happens quite often, you'll see a letter with a signature of mine or one of my other colleagues on it requesting information from your institution. First off, you'll probably get a phone call from me asking that, hey, we're looking at this particular issue, and I need this particular student's record. And it'll ask a bunch of different things. I need the student's FAFSAs on file, I need the ICERs, I need his copy of his ID, I need his current schedule, and it's usually to assist an investigation. And what that is it's going to be a FERPA letter, and what a FERPA says is we're actually exempted from the FERPA requirements, so you actually do not have to notify the student that we're having access to their file, if that makes sense to you. So all that's required is that this letter that I send you, you keep a copy of this letter in the student's file. That's the only requirement. So I know a lot of times, every once in a while, especially if we get to a school that we don't normally deal with, same thing, if you have an issue, feel free to, if you're not really sure what to do, oh, you know what, I'm going to put you in touch with our university or our school's legal counsel, and we usually work it out with them. But what it says is we act on behalf of the secretary, and we have access to any record that has to do with the administration of Title IV. All right, so your fraud obligations. In the CFR, in 34 CFR, you are required to refer any credible information. So what do we mean by credible? So a lot of times in a lot of institutions, like Aaron was saying, that you have that situation where something just doesn't seem right. There's something in your mind with your experience and your review of administering this aid that something is off. Refer that to us. We don't need for you to necessarily figure out if there's something really wrong there. Just refer it to us. It may not be anything. It may be something that's harmless, but we can make that decision and we can help you out with that. A lot of times we want to make sure we look at those things before they mushroom and blossom into something that's a lot bigger than we expected. And we catch a lot of things early. And like Aaron says, I get a lot of calls from financial aid administrators. Hey, I got this, or this person was under verification and they turned in this document and it just didn't look right. I was looking at that IRS 1040 and instead of saying Department of Treasury, it said Department of Treasury. Like that's something we want to hear about. And that was actually a real case. People do the craziest things. People make documents. People do different things. But definitely turn that stuff over to us and we'll see what we can do. Like Aaron said, we have to prioritize the things that we work, but these things don't go into a black hole. They do go somewhere. Whether it go to one of our state and local law enforcement partners, whether it be something we work ourselves, whether it goes to FSA, these things do get looked at. So what are some of the fraud risk and indicators that we've seen in schools? Now, all these things are indicative of things that we've seen in prior cases in our work. A lot of things, no separation of duties. That's a huge thing. There's a reason there's a bursar's office and there's a reason there's a financial aid office. We don't mix those two things, right? So, and we've seen it in the past where, even from one of the cases I had as an example, where people have access to multiple offices and things happen. We had a financial aid director. She had access to the bursar's office and she started cashing student refund checks. That's a problem. And, the school brought it to our attention and said, hey, we have this issue. These students are out of almost $100,000. What are we going to do with this? So, that's another thing, separation of duties. Everybody has these respective duties and, we guard our separate areas. High turnover of personnel. That's a huge one for us. Every time that we've done a search warrant at a school or we go in later and we interview people and we say, what was going on in here? What was, what kind of clued you in that something was going on? Well, we had a financial aid director, but she left, and then the deputy, she left, and, I got promoted up, and, and I thought something was wrong. Even if you can't define fraud, you know it when you see it. And many people, when they see it, they want to get away from it. And I don't blame them. You don't want to be caught up in this stuff. A lot of times in a lot of our cases, we use, one of the charges that we use is conspiracy. And it's when 2 or more people engage in some criminal act. You don't want to be caught up in the conspiracy. So people know when they see it and they try to get away from it. Unusually large amounts of payments for cash, altered records, we see that a lot. We get reports sometimes where financial aid administrators in a school say, hey, we got notified that a program review was coming and the owner of the school said, we need to stay late because we got to fix the records. There's nothing wrong with preparing records and making sure your records are neat and ready for an FSA inspection. But when you're making records, when we're adding fake high school diplomas to records, that's the stuff we want to hear about. Repeat audit findings. A lot of times when you have an audit and you keep seeing the same things over and over again and they're not being corrected, it's an indicator that something that may be amiss. All right, so some examples of some fraud schemes. So FAFSA fraud. This is it's kind of our bread and butter. So Social Security numbers, people misusing the Social Security number of someone else. We see these all the time, of course. We get a number of identity theft complaints, and a lot of times what will happen normally, and that's why we get those referrals from different agencies, the first call people make when they get a letter from the Department of Education saying, you owe us money, and they haven't been to school anywhere, they call their local sheriff's office, they call their local police department. Hey, I got this letter, I never went to school, somebody used my Social Security number, so we see that a lot. Alien registration status. That's a huge issue as well. People misuse their status, go to school, receive aid that they're not entitled to. Maybe they're using the Social Security number or the status of someone else. Dependency status, we used to see this a lot. I still see it sometimes where people make up kids. I always tell financial aid administrators, there's nothing wrong with asking for verification. Make them prove it to you. It's okay. When they make up, oh, I have 4 kids, and they don't live with me. They live with my mother. They're not taking care of those kids. Ask for more information. Income and assets, same thing. They walk in your office and they say, I don't make a dime. Well, how do you live? Where do you live? If you're a homeless student, I can understand that too, but where do you live? How do you have a car if you make no money? Ask these questions. The number of family members in college. See that a lot too. They got 8 people in college, and nobody's graduating. And they've been in school for years. It's crazy. You know, mom, dad, everybody's got $150,000 in Pell between them. That's crazy. Ask questions. Falsification of GEDs and high school diplomas. We see that a lot. You know, if you see a school that you don't recognize, and every state's different, you know, and especially people that live in Florida, we have a unique problem with high school diplomas. Our state Department of Education is a little different on how they license diploma granting companies. So if you see a diploma you don't recognize, feel free to call them. Maybe they exist. Maybe they only exist online. How long was the program? Ask the student. You know, students are pretty honest, and most times they'll tell you, you're like, whoa, wow, so I've never heard of this school. Where is it? Oh, I got that yesterday. Nobody can get a high school diploma in a day. So follow up on that. Identity theft, like I said, we see those a lot of the times. You know, our information is out there. It can be compromised in many ways. It's just one of the things that we just have to deal with, and that's just the reality of our situation at this point. But we see a lot of that, especially in distance learning. Identity theft is huge. You never see the student. So the things you can ask, the things you can't ascertain, try to get that information. And distance fraud schemes, that's huge for us. We have a lot of issues with distance fraud schemes. For whatever reason, I have no idea, Mississippi is the capital for distance fraud. So we have a lot of groups of people that get together and they decide we're going to defraud this online university or this online college. So make sure you ask the questions. If it doesn't seem right, you know, and it's usually small indicators. There's the little things that you see that make sense. If everybody's email address that applies for this one particular program is their first name dot last name at yahoo.com, that's odd. First name dot last name 02, that's odd. You know, go follow up, like, okay, that's kind of odd. And then you go back and look at the system records. They all log in and do the one assignment, and it's the same assignment. You know, hopefully the professor notices, you know, you will hope they would figure that out, but that's the things we want to, that's the things we see in our cases. We want to see that stuff. Okay, so example of some French schemes at different schools. Ghost students, students that just don't exist. They never come to class, they're never actually online, they never actually show up. Default rate fraud. So we work off the cohort default rate. A lot of schools are trying to keep their rates down because we all know if we go over the rate for 3 years, then you're out of the Title IV program. So everybody's working hard to keep their default rate down. And 90-10 manipulation kind of goes into that same thing. Everybody knows what 90-10 is? Anybody not know what 90-10 is? I can explain it. So 90-10 says you can receive up to 90% of your funding from the Department of Education. The other 10% must come from some other source. So schools fill that 10% in with different things, VA funds, Department of Labor, cash payments, what have you. So when you receive that 90%, then you can be put out of the Title IV program. Falsified last date of attendance, we see that a lot. You know, schools will say, hey, this person was sitting here and they were here the entire time. And we come back and do our investigation, they were in Europe for 6 months. How could they be sitting in class? They weren't here. Fraud and theft by school employees. As unfortunate as it is, every time that we've arrested somebody that worked at a school, everyone always says, we can't believe that person did it. And it is really sad. This is the people you work with every day that you knew, that you spend time with, and like Aaron said, they made a bad decision. And it happens, it's unfortunate. But sometimes when you see those things, you have to let people know. Because you know what's right and you know what's wrong. And everybody in this room is a taxpayer. We're all responsible for this. So we have to make sure we safeguard the dollars that we have because they're not endless, we know that. Let's see, failure to make refunds, falsification of grades. You see the falsification of grades? You used to see that a lot with federal work study students. So when federal work study students have access to sensitive systems in a school, especially the registrar's office, just keep a little bit of more of an eye on them. And it seems like a harmless crime, but unfortunately we've seen students get arrested after they've graduated because they got grades they weren't entitled to, or they've had their degrees revoked. And as sad as it is to go pick somebody up at their office 3 or 4 years out of college and they thought this was just a harmless thing because them and their buddies decided to change grades, it's not. It all affects something else. All right, so I'm going to go through just a few examples of some of the work we've done in the last couple of years. Like I said, we try to keep all our cases updated. We do a lot of work, but we wanted to give you just a highlight of some of the things we've done in the past couple of years. So this is actually a case I had, one of my last cases I worked before I got into management, is a school called Fast Train. So a really quick synopsis. So Fast Train was a for-profit trade school in Florida. They had 7 campuses throughout the state. And what their owner decided to do was he hired off-duty strippers to recruit students without high school diplomas and GEDs. So these women would work at some exotic dancing place all night, and then they would sleep in late, and then around 12 o'clock they would hit the streets and they would pick up anybody that was out on a street corner, homeless shelters, wherever, bring them back to the school to sign up for school, and they didn't have high school diplomas or GEDs. So it was a long case. Ended up at the end, there were over 1,300 fraudulent FAFSAs that were filed with false statements, resulting in a loss to the department over $6 million. And during this whole thing, the owner and about 7 other individuals were convicted of various crimes, and the owner went to prison for 97 months. So he's currently at the Federal Correctional Center in Pensacola, Florida. And then on top of that, we'll go into a little later, the school also received a civil judgment against them for $20 million, and we'll go into how that number got so high. The next case is it's a counterterrorism case, and like Aaron said, you really don't expect necessarily for the Department of Education to be involved in a case that involves terrorism, but there was a few individuals that were going to school, and this was in 2014 and 15, and they decided to use their refund money to go fight for ISIS. They decided that the life they had here in the United States was not the life they wanted to lead, and they took the money that the federal government gave them to live on to go fight for the caliphate. So needless to say, this was a joint investigation with the FBI, and the 2 men in this case that were sentenced, one got 30 years in prison, and the other 2 got 20. So one of those, unfortunate things, these guys made a choice. They decided that they wanted to go fight for ISIS and then come back and do God knows what, but now they're in prison for the better part of their lives. This is a fairly recent case, Zoraida Velasquez. She was the personnel director at the Pontifical Catholic University in Puerto Rico. And what she did was she decided that she had access to one of the university's credit cards. And a lot of different purchasing departments in your school have credit cards, of course. She misused that credit card and, of course, tried to cover it up. And then what she did was she called the bank, the issuer of the card, and had the credit limit raised on the card. I think in the end she ended up having the credit limit raised to about $300,000 and directed the bills to come to her house. So over the course of about 2 years, she racked up $655,000 in expenses on the credit card. Trips to New York with her family, trips to Disney World here with her entire family, pictures with Disney, pictures with Mickey. She had a great experience right at Epcot. So, like I said, this is a fairly recent case. She actually hasn't been sentenced yet. Her sentence is actually pending. Of course, due to the storm, all the cases kind of got pushed back on the back burner in Puerto Rico, but I think she's going to be sentenced, I think, sometime in January. So that case is actually ongoing. EDMC. So EDMC, this was one of the very large it's actually the largest civil case we've ever had in OIG. EDMC was actually accused of and admitted to misleading practices in their recruitment and also to incentive compensation. Their entire payroll was based on how many people you can get into the school. And as we all know, incentive compensation is illegal. You cannot pay people on the number of heads they bring into a school. We don't do that anymore. So they admitted their liability in this matter, and the total civil settlement they reached with the Department of Justice was $95.5 million. Huge case, very huge case. So, and we're gonna, like I said, we're gonna talk about why those numbers, the $20 million and the $95 million, we're gonna talk about that in a second. One of the biggest charges that we use in education fraud is 20 USC 1097. Title 20, United States Code 1097. And what that says is anybody who knowingly misapplies, willfully embezzles, steals, or obtains by fraud anything to do with federal financial aid is guilty of this offense. And it also includes the failure to return Title IV. Because we've had a lot of issues with that in the past with schools that fail to return Title IV funds to the department. So it's a felony, and the maximum sentence is a $20,000 fine and up to 5 years in prison. And this is a charge we use quite often in a lot of cases that involve Title IV funds, because it's kind of a catch-all of pretty much anything that can happen in a Title IV institution. The other really useful tool that we have in our civil cases, so civil meaning financial, right? So the other really useful tool we have is, in a civil case, is the False Claims Act. The False Claims Act says that any false claim that you make to the government, then you may be liable up to 3 times the actual damage to the government plus a penalty. So for example, the case we were talking about Fast Train with the strippers. There are 1,300 FAFSAs, right, that were submitted in that case. Each time the school facilitated the submission of a false FAFSA is a false statement. So each of those instances is a $10,000 to $20,000 fine per FAFSA submitted, plus whatever the losses to the government were, times 3. So if the government lost $1,000 on that one student, the government can ask back for $3,000 plus a penalty. So that's why those numbers get as high as they do. It's a very powerful tool that we have. Sometimes they negotiate it down to maybe double, but a lot of times DOJ pushes for triple damages. It's a very powerful tool. So, and then to finish this, wrap this up, we discussed, Aaron kind of glossed over before. Did anybody know what a key tam is, a key tam action? Key tams are lawsuits brought on behalf of a private party for the government. So let's say, for example, someone was working in an institution, they worked in the admissions department, and they saw some major wrongdoing on the school's behalf of what was going on in the school in terms of some kind of financial fraud. They can bring a lawsuit on behalf of the federal government in the federal court and say, hey, I want to sue this school on behalf of the United States. And what that does is, if the case is successful, they get a percentage of the recovery. It's a calculation that goes into there. So it's a pretty common practice. We get a lot of key tams. A lot of people sue other schools on behalf of the federal government, and a lot of them are successful. And it's actually a decent payday depending on what the recovery is. So keep that in mind as well. All right, I'm going to turn this over to Rob Mancuso of the Technology Crime Division.
Just really quickly, the difference between a criminal case and a civil case is really the burden of proof, right? Sometimes, people insist this is a crime, this is a crime, this is a crime. We have to, go after them, but we have to be able to prove intent in a criminal case, whereas in civil investigations, it's just preponderance of the evidence, meaning it's more likely that it happened than not, right? So the burden of proof in a criminal case is much higher for us to prove. It's not always what you know, is what you can prove, right? You've heard that phrase.
My name is Rob Mancuso. I'm the special agent in charge of our Technology Crimes Division, and I apologize if I seem a little down. It's not because all my time is almost up. It's because I didn't get the intro music that the secretary got this morning and the lights. That was pretty awesome. I was kind of hoping for the same thing, but usually when I give these talks, I usually feel like you ever see the commercials for the most interesting man in the world? See those commercials? I usually feel like the least interesting man in the world because no one really wants to talk about geek stuff. but I think everybody in this room can understand how serious the cyber threat is. How many people have either been a victim of identity theft or are part of a university or institution that has had a data breach? A lot of people. If we asked that last year, it would have been a whole lot less people. So you can kind of see the importance of why we have a technology crimes division and why we investigate the types of things that we do. So I am going to go through this really quick. I am really privileged to manage a team that's extremely diverse in disciplines. We not only have agents, but we employ IT specialists that have forensic skills, forensic analysis skills. We have investigative analysts who, Nicole here is on my team, and she's an investigative analyst who does data analytics, as well as a financial analyst. So when you see those search warrants, like we saw in the video, when we go in there, my team is usually there doing the imaging of the computers. So we go into the school, the institution, and we seize or image all of the computers there in order to get the evidence off there to provide to the case agents. Not only that, when we seize financial records, our financial analysts can look through those records and see, is money being funneled, is it being laundered, what's going on with the money. So it's unique within the IG community, which is something else that we're also proud of. We have a great management team, senior management at the IG's office who really believes in kind of taking a step out to have these kind of capabilities where other inspector generals do not. Our investigative mission, we look at cyber threats against the department's IT infrastructure, as well as conducting investigations into any system that processes, disperses, or administers Title IV data. So almost everybody in this room would probably have a system that would fall into that category. We work very closely. I have a couple people nodding from FSA who we work very closely with when we investigate data breaches and we're looking into those systems. We also identify and provide referrals of vulnerabilities in department systems and programs. I think one of the biggest things that we've had the past year is we did one of those management information reports. We had identified that there were several financial aid systems that did not have banner language that helped us prosecute those who were getting into the systems with unauthorized access, who didn't have the authorization to do that. So we actually wrote up a management information report, sent it to the department, and asked them, recommended that they change their banner language to better reflect the federal statutes that we use to charge those individuals. So that is an instance where we identify something and refer it to the department for them to take action on it. So why are you a target? Why is any of this stuff important? You all should understand that each one of you work in a target-rich environment. You have data that's of extreme importance to individuals who want to do damage to your institutions or to the federal government or to the individuals, the students who attend your schools. You can get on the dark web and buy an identity for $1. That might not seem like a lot, but take how many students go to your school and times that by $1. And then take all the institutions in this room and add that together, all right? And then you look at the FSA application. For any of you who keep up with IT or geek like myself, there's a blog called Cribs on Security, all right? It's one of the ones that a lot of people know about. This weekend, name DOB SSN equals FAFSA data goldmine, all right? It is no longer a secret the type of data that you all have. And Brian Krebs lays out the 200 data elements that you could obtain by getting access to those things. So properly securing your data is of extreme importance. And for us, prosecuting those or investigating those who take advantage, who try to get access to those systems is important to us. So you guys have hardware and bandwidth of interest, email addresses. If somebody compromises a student's email address, they can use that for phishing. They can use that for spear phishing, where they pretend to be that person to send information to another person, or malware to get somebody to click on it. So there's all sorts of ways that you can take advantage of the resources that you have there. One of the things that we've been recently looking at is the dark overlords. Has everybody heard about what's going on with the dark overlords? It's been all over the news. It's this group of hackers that had hacked hacked into several elementary schools, K through 12 elementary schools, and they had stolen data and they were holding it ransom unless those schools paid in Bitcoin, which is kind of the currency of the dark web. Unless they paid it, they were going to release it all. And so they're now going after higher institutions. So these threats are real. They're no longer kind of theories, they're happening on a daily basis. We kind of talked about the threat. I really want to get through this quickly because I want to hand it off to Nicole, who's going to talk about some ways that you can use the data that you have available to do your own data analytics. So we're kind of giving you the investigator hat, giving you the analyst hat, and saying these are ways that you all can look at the data you have available and possibly identify things that could be referred to us. So I'm going to hand it off to Nicole. All of these slides, if you download the app on your phone, you can get access to all the slides. I apologize going through this quickly, but all of this information is there. We'll also be at the resource table right after this, so if you want to come talk to us, we'd love to talk to you.
Hi everyone, my name is Nicole Eisenzopf. I'm an investigative analyst, so unlike them, they put the folks in handcuffs. I sit behind a computer all day and look at data. You guys too can use data analytics to detect and prevent fraud. You could range from software programs to detect fraud, or you can do it just using reports from your own school systems and doing the analysis in Excel. The best way that you can prevent your school from being a target is to detect it before the money even goes out. And if you do that, please report these to the OIG, because if you stop the fraud, you stop them from exploiting your school, they're going to turn around and target someone else. Just kind of picking up on what Jason was talking about with fraud rings. The purpose is you have a fraud ring leader or you have someone who has a bunch of stolen identities. They're going to use that information for each of these straw students to apply for aid. They're going to do the minimal amount of kind of coursework that you can do for an online course to secure that disbursement, and then they're going to leave and try to target another institution. So what you want to do is you want to think about, okay, where can we see this activity? Where might we detect red flags or anomalies with these kind of fraud schemes? And you can look at the admissions process, you can look at the class activity, and you can also look at disbursements and follow the money. I'm going to briefly touch on these because we have just a few minutes, but look at those IP addresses, see if there's trends, see if there's coursework, see if they're applying from the same IP addresses, see if they're coming in through a virtual private network. If they're trying to obscure their information, I'd be happy to talk to you all more at the Resource Center about that. Look for commonalities within phone numbers, if they're submitting the documents from the same fax numbers or using the same programs. If you find commonalities in, you guys are dealing with the students directly. You might field calls from the students, and you might notice it's the same voice, or you might notice, oh, the voice doesn't match the student name. If you have Jason talking and pretending to be me, there's a bit of a difference there. Again, they might use temporary or disposable email addresses like Mailinator and Disposable.com. We're seeing that one as being a trend right now. And using aliases to hide. They're applying from the same address even though they're trying to hide it and make it look like it's different. Look through the references, see if they're doing the same people, they're reporting the same people on their master promissory note, or even reporting each other. That's another way they try to obscure the activity. And again, as Jason said, look for kind of forged information. Look for things that just don't seem right. When it comes to class activity, you guys have your online platforms, the way that you deal with distance education. You can use audit reports. You can use a lot of the information in there to do this monitoring for you. Look again for IP addresses. If your school has these data points available, like the passwords and the challenge question and answers, please take a look. You might find some interesting information. But with these fraud schemes, they're going to be enrolled in the same classes and programs. If you have a list of 10 people that you're doing coursework for, you're going to try to keep it in the same program so you don't have to do coursework for a whole bunch of different courses. But again, the most important thing is follow the money. Where are the funds being dispersed to? Because their main goal in this is that Title IV refund check. Is it the same bank account? Are the debit cards going to kind of the same geographic area? Is the address being changed? So is the student applying from one address, but the debit card being sent somewhere else? Or was the address changed right before disbursement? And you all have the authority to make some modifications for students participating exclusively in distance education programs. All right, Jason is going to finish up.
So pathways to success. How do we have a successful mission, right? It's through you. It's through you. So why do we report fraud to the OIG? So we're required to, number one, that's the overall, if you want to receive Title IV funds, you're required to actually report the fraud to us. But beyond that, though, like I said, every single person here is a taxpayer, and we cannot do it without you. Every single one of you in this room is important. So I would say almost the majority of the referrals I get are from you. Keep sending those in. And like I said, they do not go into a black hole. After this, like I said, we'll have time down in the resource center. Talk to us. If something's going on at your institution, if you're being targeted from the outside, if you have an inside issue that's going on with the administration of Title IV, talk to us. That's what we're here for. And we cannot do it without you. Every single one of you are our eyes and ears. Like I said, I cover Florida. Florida has 67 counties. In addition to Title IV, I'm also worried about K through 12. But I have you to help me, help us do our job. Like I said, avoid being part of that fraud scheme. Don't get caught up in the conspiracy. The last thing you want is a visit from us at 6 o'clock in the morning. Don't be caught up in it. Prevent administrative actions at your institution. Avoid civil penalties. A lot of times when DOJ does do those cases, it puts schools out of business. It puts people out of jobs. And prevent criminal prosecution. Nobody wants, if you never had a chance to see it, federal prison is not a nice place. As much as people like to make you think that Club Fed is nice, it is not. There's different levels, and like I said, any level that you end up at will not be a nice place. So here's our referral process. So to give a little more background, like Aaron talked about this, and I know it's a lot of concern about this one particular topic, is what happened to your complaint when you make a complaint to the OIG? So the school sends a referral, as you can see on the chart. The OIG evaluates it, and usually the hotline evaluates this, most of your complaints. If it's something that has nothing to do with the Department of Education and is not of any kind of crime or any kind of violation of law, rule, or regulation, then it may be no referral. That's a really rare instance that happens. For the most part, those are usually the crackpots that are on their computer at 2 a.m. telling us that aliens are attacking their house. That's usually when you get the no referral for anybody. But when you do make a referral, if it's something that is a violation of law, and it's not necessarily something that we can work, because a lot of times I do get complaints. I got a complaint not too long ago that was telling me about a sexual assault that happened in a school, in a K through 12. That's not something that we would normally work, but I sent it to the local sheriff's office because that's something they will work. And they actually do respond back to us, hey, we got in touch with the complainant and we're taking care of it. So a lot of times we do send referrals to our local and state law enforcement partners. We work really well in all the states in the country, all 50 and the territories, we work really well with the local and state law enforcement officers. State education agencies, a lot of times things will go to the State Department of Education because it's maybe more related to a licensing issue or maybe having to do with a state regulation that's been violated. So some referrals do go to those places.
Comment. I think it's important for you to understand, oftentimes when we receive referrals, if it is about a third party, we will get calls from you saying, can I get an update? And the answer is no, right? One, because there are privacy laws that prevents us from being able to share that information. But there are also investigative techniques that if we see something and through our intelligence, maybe sometimes through their work, we may decide to do an undercover operation. So there are sensitive investigative techniques that we're not often we're not going to share with you and give you an update, because if you know there's something going on, we don't want to compromise our ability to gather the best evidence, which is oftentimes when we do it covertly. So I've gotten referrals or calls from schools, and they're upset that they haven't gotten an update on the case status, and I've tried to sort of walk folks through the reasons why you don't get that. And I often say, when we're at a point where we can share and follow up with you, we will do just that. Many times, some of you become witnesses when we get to a point where we're ready to indict or arrest individuals. And again, 95% of what we're doing is individuals trying to impact you, right? Your brand. Don't think of it as education. Don't think of it as someone else. But I think you value your brand, your school. Think of it as protecting your brand, because most of the fraud is directed at your school, obviously to get sometimes education funds. But I wanted to at least touch on that, why we don't often give updates, right, on some of the cases we do in fact have.
Yeah, like Aaron said, sometimes it's a one-way street, and I know it'll seem irritating. You're like, man, I'm giving the OIG all this information, but I'm not getting anything back. We're working on something. We're trying to make something happen. I had a case years ago where a financial aid administrator called us, and like what Nicole was saying, it was one guy pretending to be 7 different people for an online program. He called us, and we took it from that point on. And like you said, we do a lot of things covertly, And the financial aid administrator was nice enough to the point where he actually dispersed a check, and we delivered the check. We can do that, but we can only do that when they don't know what's going on. They don't know what's coming. So that's just one of the things. Sometimes some of the things that you actually will give us will actually trigger an audit, depending on what the allegation is. It may go into our audit, in our audit office, it may go into their audit plan, and it might actually trigger an audit. A lot of times, a lot of things actually come to us in investigation services, and we take a look. We take a look, and we test the allegation. We do different things. Some things are covert. A lot of things are covert, and you won't hear an update, but we're working on it. And like I said, we didn't forget about it, and a lot of times, the only indication that you have of something happening is you might read about it in the newspaper, or you might be at the school when we do a search warrant, or you might see that this person, this student that you were telling us about 6 months ago got arrested. And that's kind of just the update. But it just happens. Sometimes that one-way street has to be a one-way street, but we still want you to give us the information. And then a lot of times, a lot of things, they aren't criminal, they aren't civil, and they're referred to FSA for administrative action. And FSA has, of course, a number of things they can do to different schools and institutions and students that they take action on. So how you can help, like I said, ensure that your staff receive the necessary Title IV training. If you ever, like I said, we're down in the Resource Center. If you ever want for us to do a presentation to your staff on fraud indicators or telling you about what the OIG does and how we do our work, let us know. We are always welcome to come out. Like I said, we're all over the country. At some point in time, we're in your city for something. Let us know. We can schedule something. We can come out and give your staff training on how to see fraud in the Title IV program. Like I said, review documents thoroughly and question documents. Question authenticity. I will never be upset that you looked the second time at a document, that you questioned where a document came from, that you wanted that student to prove that he really was independent. Take that time to do that. It's okay to do that. Compare information on different documents, and then if you see fraud, if you think there may be some indicator of fraud, let us know. And like I said, even though we have to prioritize the matters we work, even though we don't take every single thing that comes down the pike, we still do something with it. We still may refer it to FSA so they can do something with it. You still may be able to take some kind of action and put the person in for an overpayment appel. It just all depends. Every situation is different, but let us know, and we can work together to figure that out. And then, of course, cooperate with the OIG if we're involved in connection with an audit or investigation. Even within the Department of Education, I get it. I'm the last person you want to see. But as you can see, I'm friendly enough. Contact us. Let us know what's going on. And we will work together to figure this out. We will work together to make sure that the valuable dollars that we have are used appropriately in this program. So as you guys all know, our number, 1-800-MISUSED. And also, like I said, the majority of our complaints that we take now are usually on the web at oighotline.ed.gov. 24/7, you make a complaint. Like I said, it doesn't go into a black hole. If it comes to Florida or Puerto Rico or Virgin Islands, I always see it. If it goes anywhere else, my colleagues see it. So anyway, we thank you for your time. Like I said, we're going to be in the Resource Center. We'll be here for a few minutes after questions, but we're going to spend the rest of the day in the Resource Center. Stop by, ask us questions, report anything. We're here to help. Thank you.
So we have about 10 minutes. Hopefully to incentivize you to ask questions. We have a OIG tumbler, have two. So the first two folks that ask questions, we have a very nice tumbler for you. Mr. Patterson. All right. That's a great question. What protections are afforded individuals that bring allegations to the OIG? There's a little-known act called the Whistleblower Protection. What that means, if there are certain elements that have to be met, but if you are working in a school or university, you decide you see something that's amiss, outright fraud, wrong, you take it to your school officials and they decide, we're going to look the other way. You can make that referral to us. We are obligated to extend confidentiality to you as a whistleblower, and there are certain protections under the law so that your school, your university cannot retaliate. So there's certain protections that are afforded the individual. Oftentimes, that is the best source of information we receive. So it's in our interest to protect the identity of the individuals. Some individuals decide to make referrals to us anonymously. It's also, we're willing to take that information. The challenge with that is we have follow-up questions. Sometimes we get vague allegations. Sometimes they're somewhat off, a little misleading, so we go do some fact-checking and say, oh, well, it's not that. Well, the information may have been a little off, so it's often better to have the individual's name so we can follow up. We don't have to follow up at your schools. We can often meet you discreetly somewhere to gather that information. But that's a great question. I think oftentimes people are afraid to sort of give information because they don't want to be exposed, but there are protections afforded to you. Thank you.
It gets increasingly frustrating for financial aid administrators because we see fraud on a very micro level, whereas I believe the department and the federal officials really would like to pursue, fraud rings and such. I've got this one kid here who's treating me like a prom date, lying to me like a prom date, and so my inclination at this point in my career is I'm thinking that maybe I should be calling my campus police. We're a public university, and our campus police are law enforcement officials. Do you have any objection at all to us doing both? I understand we have to send it to you also, but do you have any objection to us doing both routes?
I think that's a smart thing to do. As a matter of fact, I was at a law enforcement conference about a month ago, and I attended it's the International Association of Chiefs of Police. Campus police chiefs have a forum, and I made it a point to get there to introduce myself, talk about our mission, talk about the threats, cyber threats that I think Rob is talking about that I think is sort of, people are not really paying attention to. So that always helps. Oftentimes they will reach out to us if there are issues they can address, but they can also reach out to state and local police departments to make sure that they get attention to those issues. Thank you for asking that question. I have a tumbler for you, by the way.
I want to add one thing to the answer, is that if you're seeing things at a school level, it's important to refer to us because it may not be just your school. We can look at the data we can see if that same fraud scheme is being impacted by multiple schools in the area. So we can take the step back and look at, if you're seeing something on a micro level, we can look at the macro level. So that's why we always encourage to refer.
Great point.
Actually, this question's for Rob.
Okay.
You mentioned the secretary speaking, and she talked about making the FAFSA easier, even maybe an app. Now, I'm throwing a party, but I'm wondering if you're about having a heart attack, if it's becoming easier to do the FAFSA, will it be easier for fraud?
That's a great question, and we were standing up here talking about that right before we started. I have to be very careful because of our independence in terms of saying, like, the IG thinks this, the IG's office says this. So I'm going to just speak for myself. I'm trying not to get myself in trouble. We'll see.
You can talk about the importance of the back end.
Yeah, and so there is two parts of the FAFSA application. There's the front end in terms of the student experience, and then there's the back end in terms of the data that's collected. We work on everything in terms of the data that's collected on the back end. We look at logs. There are things called user agent strings, all right? So if you get online and you apply for a FAFSA, we know it's collected in terms of not only the IP address, the type of browser that you use, those type of things. So as long as whatever system's developed, security, logging, auditing, as long as that's taken into consideration, I don't think we would have any problem with it, and it wouldn't concern me. But my concern, and the concerns that we'll express, if we have the opportunity to, is in terms of making sure that those loggings and all of those security features, no matter how easy it is for the student, is still collected on the back end. Does that address the question? Okay, thank you very much. And I think we have a tumbler too.
Yeah,
Second question.
I'm going to take this down. I think we had a question right here in the front. Do you have a question?
I don't want your job next year.
Yeah, so great question. The question is, does the IG have a threshold? We do not. However, thresholds become important when we're competing to get cases prosecuted. I think that's a great question. We need to build that in our presentation. We are competing against organized crime, general crimes, violent crimes. So we often have to pitch our cases because we don't prosecute them ourselves. We're just the investigators, right? But we have to present them to a prosecutive body, whether it's federal, state, or local, to have that case accepted. And in some cities, Miami, Chicago, DC, New York, crimes are so huge, right, that sometimes we are low man on the totem pole, and so it's hard for us. So no, we don't have a threshold. We want everything. We present everything. We're obligated to present it. If we believe there's a crime, we have to present it. And sometimes the answer is no, we're not going to devote resources to that. Yeah.
I have two questions, sorry. My first one should be simple, though. Are you interested in knowing those students who claim false identity theft, especially in instances when they're trying to get out of a balance?
Correct.
And
yes.
two, at what point can we refer overpayments? So you mentioned earlier that when we refer student information to the OIG, you may refer it to the Department of Education. Do we have to wait for the Department of Education to report funds as overpayments after they've conducted their investigation if we dispersed already before learning that there might be a potential fraud situation?
So if you believe there's a potential fraud, we want to hear about it. An overpayment in itself may not be an indication of that, and we're okay that you provide it, obviously.
But I'm referring to instances where we made an OIG referral.
Okay.
You guys conduct your own investigation. We believe that there's some engagement of fraud activity, and we may have already dispersed funds.
Okay.
So for those dispersed funds, while we're not required to return to the program, should we be referring those as overpayments or wait to hear back from the Department of Education?
No, I would say we make the referral.
Go ahead.
Absolutely.
Okay, and then for my first question, you said for those type of instances, go ahead and let you know that.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So most investigative bodies, we thrive on intelligence.
Okay.
So the more information we have, Rob just talked about, sometimes we can discern patterns that you're not going to see. Sometimes it's an individual school thing, but most times, again, criminals are opportunistic. It's much broader, so we can take those patterns and put them together. And sometimes it's not really clear, but over time, as we get more information from people like yourself, it becomes very evident who we need to look at and how big the scheme may be.
Thank you.
I think we got time. One more question.
Oh, okay. I have a quick question, but also I was involved in something similar. A student came into the office and met with somebody at the front counter, and I actually met with the student. When I looked at the student's file, I saw that it was a woman I was talking to, but the sex was male. So I contacted the student. The student left, and I talked to my director at the time. And the student, I asked to come back because I saw that, you know, the student was fraudulent. So the student came back with the person who was supposed to be the male, and one of my colleagues saw that it was not that person. So we called OIG, and we had an investigation that actually they were tried by Department of Education because they had fraudulent activity at another school. The thing is, I didn't realize that I was subpoenaed. So to go and present against this person 3 years later. So my question is, how long can it take for you to actually be involved? And you may have to be subpoenaed. That person may have to, they may know who you are at some point, sometimes if it's taken to court.
Tricky question. It depends on the complexity of the case, but attorneys oftentimes make things very complicated. So I can't give you a time frame for that, but I said earlier, oftentimes we rely on you all as witnesses, subject matter experts that can help us prosecute the case. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for your time.